Okay. Oh, I'm on. Good. I was a little concerned about that. Let me just get everything lined up here. Well, I'm so happy to be here. I'm always blessed, it seems, when I'm with you folk. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Just raise your hand if I'm not speaking loud enough. Seems like when I turned 65, my voice changed. That wasn't the only thing that changed, by the way. It seems like when I reached 65, my voice changed. When I reached 75, I started crying all the time. I can read the telephone book and cry, This morning, my wife and I, as usual, we like to wake up early and we like to go to bed early. And our habit is to spend the first 2 or 3 hours alone with the Lord. And I can't stay away from the book Desire of Ages. So we decided this morning we wanted to read that passage again about the Passover. I'm sure you're all acquainted with it. It's one of the most beautiful chapters in the book of Desire of Ages. In fact, I would imagine the most iconic statement of all ever written by Ellen White is in that chapter. You all know it, don't you? Page 83. Gives me goosebumps. I couldn't even get past. Pray for me, honey. I couldn't get past that page where it's talking about how Jesus, only 12 years old, can you imagine, 12 years old, is standing there looking at his dear parents with pity in his heart because they don't understand. They don't seem to sense the full measure of his mission. Now, his mother's been told, his mother's been told that he is here for a very special purpose. He's the Son of God. His dad, but his mother, and Jesus stands there looking at them with deep sorrow in his heart, Ellen White says. Isn't that amazing? Don't ever underestimate a child. A child understands Jesus many times better than we do because of his innocence. We've experienced too much of the crud in life that somehow it still soils our view. But a child, 12 years of age. And this morning, when I talk about gardening, I want to begin by telling you that the garden has become to me one of the favorite sacred places in my life. I can't walk out to my garden without knowing that I'm about to experience something special. That I'm going to be gardening with someone that knows all about life. And whereas I'm kneeling down there digging out things and weeds and so forth, perplexed by the Japanese beetles and all the stuff that's happening, Jesus is here comforting me, and he's saying, Carl, I'm going to fix all of this someday. Everything's going to be pure again, and you're going to live in the Garden of Eden again. What a wonderful thought. And I hope that you understand that when we talk about the garden, there's no experience in life that can bring you closer to the Lord than the garden. The garden. I mean, Jesus talks so much about gardening. Talked about weeds. He talked about stony soil. He talked about these things that pertain to living and life and the marvel of creativity. And so when I walk out to the garden, and by the way, I was so thrilled yesterday sitting there listening to my daughter and her dear friend talking about walking around barefooted. Did any of you pick that up? Because just the other day I was reading, because I learned this some time ago, that walking barefooted, in fact, I can remember as a child, I grew up in the South, and we could just never quite wait for the day to when we could pull our shoes off and go barefooted. Remember that? Oh, Mommy, can I go barefooted? No, honey, it's too cold. Oh, but I want to go barefooted. And do you know that every morning, I mean, even when it's frozen, I walk barefooted out to my garden and pick kale to bring back to my wife so that we can have a nice, healthy smoothie every morning. Barefooted. Because do you know what some of the doctors are now finding out? They're finding out that one of the best treatments for troubled souls is to walk barefooted. There's a connection. There's something. I don't know. It's a mystery. This might be one of those 1,000 things we will sit down with Jesus through eternity and discover the secret. Why? And we've all known it's so enjoyable to be barefooted, isn't it? Pull your shoes off. At night you pull your shoes off and your toes spread, and you know that feeling, don't you? Yeah. So I was quite excited yesterday when they were talking about that. I said to my wife, listen to this. And the other day, I just felt impressed. I mean, just the other day, I felt impressed because I was thinking about my introduction today. I thought, I've got to take them out to the garden with Jesus. I've got to tell them that this is all about Jesus. And I was thinking, as I was doing that, I was thinking, yes, and I always do it barefooted. And so I thought, well, I'm going to look this up. I'm going to find some of the scientific stuff about this. And I did. I looked it up. And it said that doctors, these are PhD, MDs, these guys that like to put these initials behind their because they want to convince you that they know more than you do. And they are now discovering that going barefooted is much better than a psychiatrist, having you lie down on something and telling about all of your troubles and all your problems. But think of it, the garden. Now this morning, I hope that I can plant in I'm not going to be so much these two sessions talking about details and specifics about gardening and all the problems that we have with it, because you can do a lot of research. Listen, there's all kinds of information on YouTube. Have you found that out? Everybody and his brother thinks he's an expert on gardening. And you'll find all kinds of theories and ideas and all kinds of things. If you just, get on YouTube and be very selective and do a lot of praying. I always do a lot of praying when I turn on YouTube. And I say, Lord, lead me to the right sources. And the Lord has done this. He's led me to so many wonderful sources where I have solved a lot of problems in my garden. And listen, I don't know anybody that's an absolute expert on gardening. Gardening, it will be an experience that, oh, you are? She raised her hand. Oh. I was pointing to God. Oh, pointing to God. I thought, here's one. We didn't know that. There's one over there. But I want to tell you, I think gardening will be an eternal experience. Amen. I don't think God will ever take us away from the soil. Listen, do you know there's a whole universe below the soil? Did you know that? There's a whole universe below the soil. There's all these little things living there. They said that if you took just 1 cubic inch of soil, you would have a numberless number of microbic life. You would have all these little critters, all these little things growing that are living under there. There's a whole universe down there. And one of the most important things I can tell you today is when you go to your garden and when you go to try and make your plants really thrive, don't think about feeding your plants. Feed those little critters. You feed the soil. Most people make the mistake of thinking they're feeding the plant, but you feed the soil. You feed all of that numberless number of universe that's below the soil that God has created. God sees them. He can see them with his eyes. He doesn't need some kind of electronic microscope. He knows every one of them. Isn't that amazing? I can't even begin to comprehend that. But the garden is a place of magnificence when it comes to the concepts of creation. And so this morning, I want to maybe plant some paradigms about gardening. You know, many years ago, we gardened, very traditional. It kind of evolved on farms because most people lived in rural areas. They gradually moved into cities and gradually got away from the rural life where there was farming and where everybody grew their own food. But some years ago, and some of us are old enough to remember that there was a time when you could drive across this country and you would see these farms and you would notice that near the houses there would be gardens. There were always gardens. And my dad, who was a minister who pastored in churches, and we moved around, we always had a garden. I don't care where we were, where we lived. My father always made arrangements to have a garden, and sometimes it would not be at our home because we didn't have land. And so he would find somebody that would allow us to come and have a garden. And I can't even remember the first days that my father would allow me to come with him to the garden. And my dad would assign me things that did not cause me to hate gardening. I find that people who don't like to garden normally had the experience as children doing unpleasant things. They had to do all the weeding, or they had to do, things that just weren't enjoyable. My dad never did that. He was a smart guy. He had me doing things that were fun. Like, for instance, he said, "Carl, would you like to plant some radishes?" Now, why do you suppose he did that? Because radishes are real quick, and kids, like things to happen fast. And you can plant radishes, and in 20 days, you can start eating them. Isn't that amazing? And I had the job of raising the radishes, and I enjoyed it. And to this day, I still love one of the first things to plant are radishes. So I hope that you can learn to enjoy gardening. Gardening should not be a laborious, boring, hard task. Do you like to garden? Oh, these beautiful kids. I love them. And I want to plant a paradigm today about gardening, hopefully that's not old-fashioned, where you remember how the gardens used to be? It was a long row and 3 feet, and a long row and 3 feet of dirt and weeds, and a long row. Remember that? And we would plant maybe, how many broccoli plants? 100 broccoli plants. They'd all reach maturity the same day, and you would eat 3 of them, and they were perfect. And what did you do with the rest of them? Yeah, you either had to give them away, or you canned them, or froze them, when we finally got freezers. I can remember when we didn't have freezers. You kids don't know that, see? And I can remember when, instead of my mother canning them in these jars, we bought a freezer. Boy, that was a really great day. And my mother would freeze them. But do you know that you can garden today so much more intelligently? You don't need the long rows. You can make a grow box. And have you ever heard of square foot gardening? Well, of course, because the guy that wrote Square Foot Gardening, his book has sold more than twice any other book on gardening. His name was Bartholomew, and he was a man, Mel Bartholomew, who was an engineer. And his job as an engineer, now being an engineer, he would automatically be a very efficient person, wouldn't he? He would be a man who is very particular about things. Everything has to be in order. an engineer. But do you know what his job was at some big corporation? He was the manager of efficiency that was his title in the corporation that he worked for as an engineer. And so when he retired, he thought, well, what do retired people do? Well, they garden. And he went and bought a bunch of tools, and he came home and he went out in the backyard and he probably tilled, and he started gardening. And he thought to himself, man, is this the way people garden? I mean, this just doesn't make sense. He said, it's not even efficient. He said, we have all of these plants and we eat them when they're right at the prime of life, just at their best taste. And he said, and then the rest of them, we just, and he said, this isn't efficient. And so he began to reorder things and he began to sort of redesign things. And he came up with this notion. He said, if we have these little places where we can plant a variety of things and plant them with the notion that when they mature and they're at their prime, then we harvest them, but we don't have too many of them. And he said not only that, but he said it's much more efficient if we have a grow box, which we don't have to go out and plow the field and till the field and, and worry about the weeds and all this stuff, but we can have this so right in, just we can have control of this thing. And we can compose and create our own soil. And it doesn't take that much soil. You just take about 6 inches, and he puts together a certain number of compost and the right things, what? No, not azomite. Perlite, yeah, perlite and stuff like that. He has all of these formulas, and he says that by the time you invest in this, you don't have to invest in anything else. And you don't have to have a lot of tools. You don't even have to have a tiller. You don't have to have a tractor. You don't have to have a plow. You don't even have to have a big shovel. And he said, he shows a picture of his tools. He has, one of these little scoop things, and he has a couple of other things. And he says, and I grow the best things in the whole world. And he shows his garden. And he has about 6 of these 4-foot square, boxes, and they're all fixed. And you look at them and you see in this corner here, you see a tomato plant. And he's very scientific about that too. He puts it right where the sun's head, because the shade of the tomato plant. See, I mean, this guy is really brainy. And he has next some spinach. Spinach doesn't like, direct sunlight all the time. And he's just very scientific about this thing. And he's designed this, and now he has a new book. And here it is, right here. All New Square Foot Gardening. Now, I have to admit, I know why he wrote this book. Because his first book was so popular, he said, I can't deny the fact that I can make another $5 million. So I'll just write another book. I mean, people who become famous just write books, and they get rich. They really get rich. I don't care about their books. Their books don't make us hill of beans. I mean, because, it's just their name. Just their name. They can write a book. And if you get famous, write a book. You'll get rich. And so, but this book here, he's come out with all these new ideas. He's really plumbed his mind and his brain, and he's come up with these ideas, and he shows you how to fix this, and how many that you can have, like in a square foot. How many of this and that, and onions, and how many tomato plants you can have in 1 square, 4 foot. And it's a wonderful idea. Now, the other concept that I want to plant today, see, I'm planting right here. The other concept that I want to share with you is 4-season gardening. You ever heard of that? And you know, it's really interesting that the people, it has a marvelous history, this four-season gardening thing. It began about, 50 years ago when a family that is a couple by the name of Northerly, their name was. This man was a man who was at one time a teacher at Princeton University in the science department. And he happened to be at that era when Senator McCarthy from Wisconsin was nailing all of these guys that were getting into communism. Do any of you old enough to remember any of that history? You remember that? And this guy was tampering with socialism and with communism, and he got fired. Well, he fell in love with one of his assistants who was much younger than him, and they went off and lived in the country. They were idealist. They were idealist atheist. There are such people. And they felt they had a pure way of life, and they wanted to live a long time, and they had developed all of this philosophy that they felt was right, but they didn't believe in God. And consequently, they were the ones who initially kind of introduced the idea that you can grow stuff all year long. And what was interesting is that they lived in Maine. Now, I want to tell you, if you want to start growing things all year long, Maine's not the ideal place. You better move to Florida, or better yet, upper California, not lower, where Babylon is. But they had this humble little home because they didn't make much money. He made money only by going out giving lectures about his unique life. And it began to catch on because certain other very weird kids in universities would go to their home and learn about this way of life. And they built themselves kind of like a greenhouse. It was very, very crude looking. They would go and buy old doors, that had glass in it. And none of them would be alike. And it really looked weird. But the sun would shine in. They did it, very wisely facing the sun. And they would grow stuff all winter long in there. And they had it so that they could regulate the temperature and everything. And so they wrote a book. And as a result of all of this, a guy named Coleman stopped by. He was just a young man. And Coleman is the guy who's written the book that's gone everywhere concerning four-season gardening. And some of you probably are aware of that book. Coleman has become very famous, and he lives in Maine. And he has hoop houses, and he has cloches, and he has these special, ways of preserving and protecting plants. And by the way, there's so much good stuff today that you can buy that there's no excuse for not being able to grow successfully for, all year long. By the way, my wife and I, and we didn't really very particularly take care of our things, but 2 years ago or 2 falls ago, I planted a whole bunch of kale, about 5 different kinds. I planted 2 different kinds of Swiss chard. I planted about 4 kinds of collards, and I planted them late in the summer. And I thought, I'll get my plastic over my hoop house, and that'll protect it. And I'd done this before, and I thought, but we never did get our plastic up. Because we had moved, that's right. And this stuff came up, the Swiss chard, the kale, and everything, and the fall came, and pretty soon cold weather came, and I wondered. Now, I had already experienced, because I had a hoop house, and the hoop house is protective, and I had a thermometer in there that would register high and low, and one night it got down to 3 degrees, and I thought, surely I've lost everything. And I went out there and everything was stiff. You know how it is. It just got real stiff. My kale was just like, you could take and break it. And I figured, well, at least I'll lose all my Swiss chard, and I'll probably lose, my collards. I know I won't lose some of my kale, but I didn't lose anything. And the thermometer registered 3 degrees. Now that really impressed me. And when I figured, that we couldn't get our plastic up, and I had planted all this stuff, I didn't worry really, because I knew that probably some of it might freeze, and we would be left with the kale maybe, and with some of the collards that are especially, hardy. But do you know, not one thing suffered during the winter? We had the most beautiful garden in the winter. Our garden was a picture, a photograph, a beautiful photograph of the most beautiful garden you could possibly see. Green, all colors, light green, dark green, reddish green, some of the kale. And it was beautiful, and people would come. We would tell people in the church, and they said, "Can we come out and see this?" They come out, we'd say, "Help yourself." We had far more than we could use. And you have no excuse for not having a 4-season garden. Now, we call it 4-season. It's actually like a 3-season. 3-season. See, because it works like this. You can grow stuff early in the spring, like sweet peas and various cruciferous things like broccoli and so forth, and kale and things like that. You can get them going and put them in. And by the way, you need to have a little grow light system in your home. You can have a little area, where it can be dark and light, and you can just put one of these racks that you can get at Lowe's for about $100. And I have one that I paid about $100 for, and I have 4 rows. And I bought these lights, and my whole investment in the thing is not much more than $150. And I start all my plants in there. These tomato plants were started in there. And this year I grew about 300 tomato plants. I love to give tomato plants away. And one year my daughter and I, Bonnie and I, combined our efforts, and we produced over 1,000 tomato plants. And at our home, we had a tomato fest, and we had over 100 people show up. And we gave those tomato plants all away, didn't we, Bonnie? And it was fun. And I'm an artist. I paint watercolor, and I painted a special picture for a drawing. And we had that drawing, and then we had other things. We had, it was just a tomato fest. Wow. We had a wonderful tomato fest and gave away these plants. Now, I had 50 of these left, and any of you that would like to have them, you're welcome to have them. And I'd be happy to explain a little bit about them because they're all heirlooms. And that's one of the other points I really want to emphasize today is you need to begin, because we're in a time of history when we need to be buying open pollinated vegetables. You know why? Because you can save the seed, and there are ways to save the seed. You can find out how to do that. Find the science of how you save the seeds. Very simple. They teach you how to isolate the plant so that it doesn't interbreed with other plants and you get hybrids, In fact, that's kind of fun sometimes because some of the best heirloom tomatoes were derived by that. You got a great big tomato here in and got infatuated and they produced these seed and sometimes that's how the Cherokee Purple tomato was. Most of you would know probably about the Cherokee Purple. That's one of the world's favorite tomatoes. And by the way, do you know that there's a grandfather Ashlock tomato? There is. I got to tell you about that because my name's Ashlock. I was growing these tomatoes that my son right there sent me the seed. He said, "Dad, I still have seed that Grandpa had." And he said, but they're about 20 years old. I don't know if they're any good. And so I said, well, I'll take them and see if I can get them to go. And I got them to grow. And I remember the tomatoes my dad always grew. Man, were they the best tomatoes in the world. He called them Kentucky Beauty because his family in Kentucky always grew these. And the whole clan up there grew these tomatoes. And they didn't know what their name was. And my dad grew them. He'd grow 40 of them, and out in the field and give them away. And these tomatoes get as big as 3 pounds. I mean, they're huge. And my mother would make this homemade bread, big loaves of bread. And, you have this big slice. And have you ever cut a tomato and set it there and think, oh, the tomato's too small? Not these tomatoes. You had to shave the sides when you made your tomato sandwich out of my dad's tomatoes. Well, you know what? There's a garden forum on television that's invested by millions of people. Well, thousands of people. I don't need to exaggerate, but I imagine several million. And they have specialties. They have like a tomato, group. And and thousands of people look at this and they comment and they send in notes and they say, you need to try this and that and so forth. And you can learn a lot in this. Well, about 1906, 2006. That was a long time ago, yeah. 2006, right before we went to Thailand to teach at the school out there, I was involved with this forum and writing about, some of my experiences. And finally, I wrote something about my tomato. I said, my dad grows this tomato that, was originated with his family in Kentucky. And there happened to be a lady named Carolyn Mayle was her name. She was a PhD microbiologist who taught in some medical school out east. And her hobby, her passion was tomatoes. In fact, she wrote a book on heirloom tomatoes, the 100 best heirloom tomatoes. And it was a very popular book. And so she was often on this forum here, and I just happened to mention, my grandpa's tomato. Well, she wrote me, and she said, Carl, she said, one question, does that tomato have potato leaves or tomato leaves? Now, how many of you are acquainted with that? You understand that. Tomatoes either have potato leaves or they have tomato leaves. Now I can actually show you. Here we go. Okay. Now, can you tell the difference between these leaves? Yeah, they're pretty obvious, aren't they? Which is the potato leaf? Yeah, that's the potato leaf. That's tomato leaf. Now, she wrote me, she said, is that a potato leaf or tomato leaf? I said, it's potato leaf. She wrote back, she said, good. She said, because almost every tomato that's a potato leaf is a delicious tomato. That's what she said. So she said, Carl, she said, what's the name of that tomato? I said, I don't know. My family grew it in Kentucky. She said, some of the best tomatoes come from East Kentucky. She said, please send me some of the seed. She said, I hired 3 people to grow 800 varieties of tomatoes, and I'd like to try yours out. So I sent her seed, and it was about that time that we went to Thailand, and I kind of forgot about this because we got involved over there teaching in the college. And when I came back the next year, before we had left, she wrote about it on this forum, that there's this tomato that Carl Ashlock has sent me that really is a very fine tomato, she said. And she had another guy that's supposed to be a tomato expert check it out, and he took it to the state fair in Carolina, and it rated very high in the taste test. And so she said, you better give it a name. And I thought, give it a name? Maybe I can name it Glenda. That's my wife. No. And she said, why don't you name it after your grandfather? So I did. I just, Grandfather Ashlock Tomato. I wish now that I had named it a little fancier, like Sweet Britches, or something. And, but I did that. And because of her statement on the forum, I got all these letters asking for seed. And I sent seed all over. I'm not kidding. I mean, I sent seed to Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. I sent seed everywhere, it seemed. And I was just sending seed out, spending money for mail. And I thought, man, what's this all about? And then we went to Thailand, and I forgot about it. And I came back, and about a month or two after we got back, I don't know, we got to talking about, I wonder whatever happened with all of that. And so I thought, well, I know what I'll do. I'll type in Google, Grandfather Ashlock Tomato. And I got 1,400 hits. somehow things had spread, But, and I was kind of excited. I mean, it's my only fame, I mean, I'm famous for a tomato. Not really. But
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, you can Google Grandfather Ashlock Tomato, and you.
A couple of seed companies picked it up.
Yeah, there are several seed companies that are selling this seed.
Well, where's your cut?
None. I haven't gotten any cut. Yeah, you can find it, Grandfather Ashlock Tomato. And I wouldn't say it's any better than, I'll tell you what it's very much like if you're acquainted with the Brandywine tomato. It's very similar. You can't tell the difference when I grow them, because Brandywine is also potato leaf. And I grow them right next to each other, and you can't tell the difference between the fruit and the plant and everything. Those plants will reach. I had a Grandfather Ashlock plant last year that reached. It was 11 feet when I measured it. Just really grew. Well, I also want to talk to you about this idea of the open pollinated. We're living in the last days. Folks, we don't know. In fact, all we know right now is that we don't know what's going to be tomorrow. Every day is changing, every day. And we are more and more living in a very precarious state, whether you're Christian or not. I pity people who are not Christians. I pity people who don't know what we know. I really do, because they don't realize what they're in for. But folks, even though we recognize they won't be numbered among those people that will be isolated for persecution, and we will, that is not our worry. That is not our concern. Our concern is that we simply follow God's leading through these troubled days, and that we stay close to the Lord. That in our gardening, we dedicate our gardening to the concept that, Lord, if you want me to use my gardening to survive, teach me how to do it. Teach me how to do it. Now, I'm going to talk tomorrow about more of the mechanics and the gardening concepts. But today, what I want to do is plant into you the seed that might grow in your heart, that you would find gardening to be one of the richest spiritual experiences you could possibly imagine. I can't imagine my life without gardening. I really can't. I don't know, even when we were in Thailand, we were trying to grow stuff. And I just feel like, folks, that we're in for some very difficult days, and if it really takes us to know this in order to live a little bit better, then we need to get involved, and we need to take it seriously. Now, Ellen White talks about gardening a lot. She does. And wherever she went, she was a gardener. When I was a boy, about 12 years old, her grandson came to our home and stayed in our home. One of those twins. Are you acquainted with Ellen White's family? She had a son who had twins. And these twins, Harold and forget the other one's name, they lived there in Elmshaven when Ellen White, just before she died, and she was writing Desire of Great Controversy, actually. And they were just boys. And if you were to go to Elmshaven today, anybody been there? If you go to Elmshaven today, you would find out front 3 giant walnut trees. And this boy helped his grandmother plant those. He came to our home when I was just a boy, teaching us how to compost. And he taught us how to plant trees. And he said, grandmother, and you know what I remember about him as a kid, you remember strange things. When he talked, he always sniffed. He would say, now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to, and that's what I remember. But he ingrained in our family the concept of organic gardening, and I will always be grateful. And of course, the significance of the fact he was Ellen White's grandson. But he talked about her, he talked about how grandma would have me do this and do that and go get a stone and and bring it here and lay it down. And I'm sure most of you are acquainted with how to plant a tree, Ellen White's way. Ellen White went to Australia, and I mean, she was only there 10 years, but in those 10 years, she had they claim one of the most productive fruit orchards, mainly peaches, that within 3 years of planting those trees, they were reaping these beautiful peaches. And they claim that it not only grows a tree, I don't know if you've seen some of the illustrations of this, but there's a guy named Noag is his last name. He's on the internet, and if you put in, how do what's the
It's something method.
well, you can put, Ellen White's method of growing trees, but it's called it has a name. Blueprint. That's right. Blueprint. You'll discover that it's an angel showed her how to do this. It's marvelous, folks. It's inspiring. It sends chills up my spine. He showed her in a dream. She had this rocky land, and people said, you can't grow anything here. And the angel gave her this dream, and they planted these trees, and they had this marvelous harvest. And if you plant, Noag shows pictures of how they plant the red, what's that big tree? Red,
Sequoia.
huh?
Sequoia.
Redwood, the redwood tree. They planted according to the forestry regulations, and he had 2 of them there, and we planted according to Ellen White's regulations, and it's standing 14 feet high, and these are standing 4 feet high after 4 years. So, folks, we have a wonderful heritage. We have a marvelous heritage, and gardening is right in it. It's right in it. It's very deep in it. Our forefathers were great gardeners. James White knew the field. He was a man who spent much of his life making the little bit of money they ever made out harvesting and working in the grain fields and digging ditches and things that we don't have to do today. That is, our ministers at least. So to wrap this up, what time? I just want to make sure that I'm getting everything in here because
Open pollination.
yes, open pollination. Uh, Study that, and you will find that that is very fascinating. You can save your own seed. There are ways of preserving your seed. Some people do it in free. Don't. I do mine in refrigerator. They say there's an advantage to that somehow, and I don't know all the mechanics or all the details. But bunch over there. I wish I had more because they're all gone. I gave away. But there's. Oh yes, I wanted to do this. Yeah, since we're talking about tomatoes, in case you don't know, the way you save tomato seed is very important, and you need to know one aspect of it very well, and that is the fermentation of the seed. You take a very ripe tomato, try to get a very ripe tomato, try to get a tomato that's early in the season on that plant, and let it completely ripen on the plant. I mean, you know it's just about to burst or it's about to go bad. Take it in, cut part of the top off, and just squeeze all of that stuff out of there that will come out. And add maybe a little bit of water to that. Sit over here somehow on the windowsill where there's a little sunlight. Yeah, in a jar, and let it ferment. And green, mold will actually formulate on the top, and it'll look ugly and smell bad. And let it do that, and let it sit that way for a day or two, and then and the reason for this is that fermentation process is extremely important. It kills a lot of the things that you don't want to propagate later, and it makes that seed nice and clean and pure. And you want to make sure that you ferment it. You don't just squeeze the seed out and save the seed. You ferment the seed in a jar, and then you save the seed. What I do is I take the seed out and I wash it several times, and I'll put it on several napkins, and I'll set it over here, and within a day or two it's dry. And then what's that?
They can even stay on the napkins, right?
Yes.
Kind of dry on it.
Mm-hmm.
You just kind of,
Yes, they can dry on the napkin. They dry very easily and very quickly, surprisingly.
You could store it right on the napkin down in.
What'd you say?
Store it on the napkin. So
Oh, you can. Yes, you can store it in the napkin. We take a little sandwich,
baggy.
yeah, a little baggie, a little sandwich baggie, and be sure and label them. There's nothing more I'll tell you, and I'm bad about this. My wife's very particular about doing things right, but I'm so slipshod. I have one over there that has a big question mark on it.
It's a beautiful plant, but it's a mystery.
It's the best looking plant in the whole bunch. I was tempted to keep it, but I don't know what it is. It's not potato leaf, but boy, is it a beautiful plant. Biggest one over there. Let's see, this booger really grew. Yeah, see the question mark? I have a feeling, I think, I don't know, just looking at the plant, that it's the only hybrid that I grow is Big Beef. You say, I thought you were vegetarian. Big Beef is considered the finest tomato ever developed hybrid. The reason being is that it consistently seems to overcome any disease, and yet it produces a very tasty tomato. And it's very productive, very disease resistant. So I grew it, but I'll soon stop growing it too, because I don't want to grow any these seeds that are not open pollinated. But feel free to take what you can use. I think there are one or two. That GA there is Grandfather Ashlock. I think there are one or two of those. I don't normally push that at all. In fact, I I don't even grow a bunch of them, but I grow one in my garden. I grow 8 tomato plants generally, and we give away a lot of tomatoes. We take them to prayer meeting, and a lot of people start coming to prayer meeting. It's really, really nice. Really works. Yeah. All right. Any questions? Have any questions? Yes, sir. Just speak loud. You have a nice voice.
Well, it's so peaceful.
Yeah. Yeah. Here comes that guy. Boy, he's a nice guy.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he is.
Yeah, my question on the fermentation, does that work with all seed?
I don't know. That's a good question. Google that. Yes, ma'am.
So I wanted to clarify on the hoop house, the year that
Yeah.
everything kept growing, because you said you had your hoop house, but then you said you didn't put the plastic. Is there, for us, we have the plastic rods, and then we put plastic over that, and then in the summer we take it off. And I've kind of considered that somewhat of a hoop house, but maybe it's not. Is there a difference in, what was covering your plants that year, if not plastic?
Nothing. Well,
Right.
I have a cloth that's called Remay.
Okay.
Now there are various. It lost their other.
Trademark or
yeah.
copyright.
And you can is it 5 seasons?
Uh,
5 seasons in Nashville. 5th season. Yeah, in Asheville, you can get some of that there, and it's very light. And here's the thing about it: sometimes when I know it's going to freeze at night, and I've got something that's fairly fragile, I will take that. I buy it 10 feet wide, so it's plenty, wide, and I just lay that over the plants, and it's so light it won't hurt any plant. And one layer, depending on, they have different, different meshes, but the one that's the least, I think, is 3 degrees protection. So that if it's going to get down below 28, 27, you put 1 layer over.
Okay.
If it's going to get down, for every layer, you have about 3 or 4 degrees.
Okay.
And sometimes I'll put 4 layers. And it will protect stuff. And you begin to develop a science of how do I protect plants when you do 4 season.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 4 season, it's vital that you understand timing. You begin plants in the part of the summer that are not at all conducive for the type of plants that you're starting. Broccoli, all of your cruciferous stuff, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, all of that type of thing. You want to start at the end of July in our area. The end of July, you start it inside. You have these little lights, and you start it, or you start it in your garden. You can actually seed in your garden at the end of July. Now, if you're late, you can start it toward the end of August, and you can get them out there. But I've actually been very derelict in following that very closely, and still had marvelous success with things surviving because of the Remay.
I wanted to go back to the remade cloth.
Yeah.
Remay was a brand name, so
Yeah.
you'll see like insect barrier is the lightest. Would that be the 3%? Insect barrier.
I don't know. I don't
is-
know. I know the one that they sell at 5th season is similar to Remay.
Because you can get the frost. I mean, heavyweight, medium weight. You just
Yeah.
decide what weight you need.
They have them that go up to 8 degrees, 1 layer.
Like this year, we're going to try putting in little metal hoops
Mm-hmm.
to plant our lettuce, because lettuce like it cooler, but we want lettuce all year round,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't want those little white moth things. And,
Yeah.
so we're going to put insect barrier, which would be really thin. It won't keep the heat in, but it'll keep these flies from being able to come in and lay there.
And that will
larva.
work. That will definitely work. There are ways of doing it to protecting plants
Yeah,
And
that would help with the cabbage. And then, of course, the BT is a natural organic bacteria. You can spray on it weekly to keep those bugs away too.
yeah, the white things, yeah. Okay, any other questions?
I have one.
Yes, ma'am.
When you plant a different variety of tomatoes, how do you keep them from how
Cross-
far, how far
okay.
do they have to be planted?
Good question. I'm glad you brought that out because I had it on here. There are ways that you can do that. You put a little, you have these little, yeah, they're little bags. You can get them in Amazon. I forget what you call them.
Is it the organza bag or are they material plastic?
They're little material. They're made out. They have material.
Kind of like a net.
Yeah, it's simply to keep the bees and the wasp that spread the pollen, that share the pollen. And you just tie that around the first cluster of blossoms. Okay. Now, tomorrow, be thinking of questions you might want to ask because I want to explore things that would be helpful to you. But tomorrow, I'd like to get into the idea of nurture and how you fertilize and how do you really make your plants healthy and how I don't want to get too much into insect problems because you can do a lot of research on that and we can waste an awful lot of time talking about bugs. But what I want to talk about is how do you make your plants healthy? We'll talk about, for instance, foliar feeding, how that you can make compost tea and you can have a sprayer and you can spray. And there's a marvelous little thing in the science of this thing. You talk about religion. I mean, this thing is God-made. Plants have little mouths on the bottom of the leaves. And there was a man in Minnesota that discovered, way back, he was in Korea in the army, and somehow he discovered this and came home, and he's made a fortune out of this by selling a product that takes advantage of the fact that in the morning and in the dew time in the morning, the dew time in the evening. Who do you suppose invented that? And what do you suppose happens at the same time? What happens? All the bugs begin to sing, all the birds begin to sing, they sing, and then they sort of fold their wings and they say, well, it's over, about 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock. And they come back at night and they start doing it again, don't they? And the dew comes. And what he discovered is that underneath the leaf, you have the little mouth, and that mouth opens and the water goes in with the nurture that's on the water, and the plant is fed. Now, he took it a step further. He wondered why that mouth opened. He wondered, was that just systemic in the plant? But you know what he discovered? That mouth opens as a result of the sound of the birds and the bees. So he's invented a little device, a loudspeaker, and he's created records that you play, and in order for people to enjoy it, he's even put music with it. He'll have Brahms symphony on there. You can hear all the birds and everything right in there, and your garden right at that time, even in the middle of the day, they just open up. They say, "Wow, it's time to open up," because of the sound. Isn't that amazing? I mean, the things we discover. And so, what I want to tell you is that if you take advantage of that and you learn how to do compost tea, very simple. It's the simplest stuff you can make in 24 hours. And you take it and you dilute it and you spray it on your plants. You just take that and spray it underneath. Oh man, your plants just love it. There's a guy up in Alaska that just loves to show people his world famous records of cabbage that weigh 80 pounds or other things, and he does this every day. He feeds them, and those little boogers grow like crazy.
24 hours a day like that.
24 hours a day of sun. That's right. Yes.
What was the guy's name that did the
I see.
I'm trying to think of it. I can't think of it. Huh? Yeah, Sonic Bloom is the name of the system. That's right. Yeah, I bought some of that stuff. It's expensive, but you can do it in other ways. Yeah, Sonic Bloom. Thank you.
Bird seed to make sure you have lots of birds.
Yeah, he's from Minnesota. All right, let's close. And if you have, yes, was there something over here? Where?
I was, but I think
Yes.
we're gonna get into it tomorrow. So that's okay.
Oh, well, please save it. Please save it and be sure and share it tomorrow, will you please? All right, well, let's have prayer. Our loving Father, what a joy and a blessing to be in this group of people. Lord, I just sense your love here. I really do. These kids, just watching them, just listening to them, hearing them sing, Lord, they're not shy about their love for you. And it's such a testimony to an old man. I'm so grateful to be here. And I thank you, Lord, that we can talk about the garden. I come into the garden alone where the dew is still on the roses. Lord, teach us how to garden and teach us how to enjoy your presence when we do it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Would you want to read something off the Desire of Ages?
Yes, I absolutely did. And I will do that right here. 83, yes, you know it. Huh? Oh, well, no, they can. It would be well for us. Can you say it? It would be well for us to spend a thoughtful hour each day on the contemplation of the life of Christ. We should take it point by point and let the imagination grasp each scene, especially the closing ones, as we thus dwell upon his great sacrifice for us. Our confidence in him will be more constant, our love will be quickened, and we shall be more deeply imbued with his Spirit. If we would be but saved at last, we must learn the lesson of patience and humiliation at the foot of the cross.
You read that again tomorrow morning.
Yes, I'll read it again in the morning, and you'll all hear it. And it's in the Passover chapter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.